middle class was once a symbol of the American dream. But the American middle class today paints quite a different picture.
Being middle class, I feel like you're really just in between a rock and a hard place. You're in a spot where everyone's like, hey, you're doing better than, low class. You're doing great. You should be fine. And you're underneath the people who are actually doing fine.
It was at least a secure category. Your kids would go to a school that you felt at least okay about. You probably own a car or two, and you'd own your own home, and you could pay for your kids' college educations. So there were certain kinds of assumptions around being a middle class person that have sort of shattered.
A survey in 2018 found that a third of middle-income adults don't have $400 to cover an unexpected expense.
In polls, when people are asked about being middle class, they frequently are less likely to say so, and more people now urge the pollsters to suggest that they're working class. So I think that many people who maybe in prior years would have thought of themselves as middle class now no longer think of themselves that way.
Reading a news item about the Federal Reserve Household Economic Survey, in which they asked the question, if you had a $400 emergency, could you meet that emergency? And 47% of the respondents said that they couldn't meet that emergency without either having to borrow money or to sell something. And I read that item and I said to myself, well, who knew? But of course I knew, because many, many times in my life, and not just in the distant past, but in the unfortunate present, I couldn't afford those $400.
And that's the hard truth. Despite all his outward signs of success, Neil Gabler is frequently broke. His recent story in the Atlantic magazine brought widespread attention to that fact.
See, the idea of the middle class being the everyday working American really began after World War II when productivity and GDP skyrocketed. This meant that it was entirely possible for 70% of American families to comfortably survive on one salary, 50% to own their own home, and 50% to own a car, pay for their children's tuition, and save enough to eventually retire with the help of employer pensions. Although all of this changed in the 1970s, where for the first time, incomes of the middle class began to shrink. Why, you might ask? Well, even though there's not a confirmed cause, it is believed that throughout the 1960s, the United States began losing production, quality, and productivity dominance to Europe and Japan. So we began printing money and loosening policies in an effort to stimulate the economy.
Why the middle class is dying and why the rich are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer. One of the easiest ways we can first understand what's going on is by looking at what is intuitively misunderstood, the fact that we are not in a recession. In fact, the economy is technically doing better than ever. The global GDP is higher than any other point in history. In July of this year, the stock market in America hit an all-time high. In 2023, the unemployment rate hit 3.4%, a 53-year low, and inflation has been lowering as well. So the biggest question is, why doesn't it feel this way for most people? The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which is an economic indicator that measures how optimistic consumers feel about their finances and the state of the economy, reached its lowest ever record since they began tracking in 1966, which is even lower than during the Great Recession in 2008. And this is where our understanding of this issue can really start to develop. These statistics are economic theories based on the overall economy rather than each individual's reality. We all tend to view the economy based on a very self-centered point of view, and I don't use the term self-centered as a means to piss you off, but rather describe how most of us just look at how the economy is affecting us and the people around us. So let's look at what the average person typically spends their money on and how those prices have changed. Food prices have increased anywhere between 20 to 200% in the past 30 or so years. Want to go to school? Well, you'll be paying at least 400% more than what tuition was in the 80s. Thinking about buying a house or maybe renting an apartment? That boosted up about 700 to 900%. Of course, the prices of things are bound to go up as wages increase, we print more money, or different things are in different demand, but the amount in which our wages have increased compared to how much goods and services and stuff like that have increased is absolutely absurd. At 25 years old, when adjusted for inflation, our grandparents' pre-tax income was $74,000. The annual cost of public college as a percent of income was 14%, and the house price to income was 3 times, meaning a house cost 3 times their annual income. For our parents, it was worse, and for us, the numbers can't even compare. Not only do we earn less pre-tax income on average, but public education and home ownership is outrageously more expensive. The biggest question I wanted to understand after hearing this so many times is why.
Listen, Daniel's a businessman. He's obviously a very successful businessman. You know, I've not been anywhere. I'm not a businessman. I'm not going to pretend to be a businessman. I'm an economist. I make money by being right in the economy. Daniel's a good businessman, and I'm right on the economy. You know, it's as simple as that, basically. You know, I'm not a good businessman, but I've got 15 years of being right on this, on the economy. And look, I know you're probably a wealthy man. You probably don't want to pay high taxes. You probably don't want your kids to pay high taxes. But we exist in an economy where wealth is being extracted out of the middle class, out of the working class, very, very rapidly. It's benefiting people like the three of us at this table. It will benefit our kids. You know, our kids will be rich. Their kids will be poor. And I just think we should be honest with them. Capitalism's finished. We won. Well done, Stephen. Well done, Daniel. Well done, Gary. It's over now. Our kids will be rich. Their kids will be poor. They'll pay the taxes. We won't pay the taxes. We'll avoid it. I'll make money betting on it year after year. Why are we lying to them? Why are we lying to them?
Yeah, I think that's an overly simplified view of things.
It's an overly simplified view of things that has made me a multimillionaire.
Yeah, well, look, entrepreneurs take bets on the economy as well. We take bets differently. When we start a company, we're betting on how the economy would be.
Do you think the average British and American worker at the 50th percentile, do you think their kids will be richer than they are?
It depends if we have economic freedom or not, right? We're going to have a split test on this.
Do you think we will?
Right. We're going to have a split test. We're going to have, the UK seems like we're going to have more taxes, more regulations. And it seems like the US is going to have less taxes and less regulations. Here's what I've noticed. I've noticed that places like Singapore that have small governments have got widespread affluence. There's not a lot of poverty in Singapore.
Yeah, except for the cleaners living in the closets, yeah.
You know, look...
But we don't count them in the statistics, just like we don't count our viewers.
The professional jobs that built suburban Britain no longer sustain it. The psychological impact runs deep. You did everything right, studied hard, got qualifications, worked your way up. Yet you're worse off than your parents were at your age. The social contracts didn't just break, it reversed. Progress becomes regress. The ladder previous generations climbed has missing rungs. Retirement security vanished while nobody was watching. Company pension schemes closed to new members, then closed entirely. The state pension age rose to 67 and heading higher. Auto-enrollment means you contribute 5% of salary you can't spare for a retirement you might not reach. The maths is terrifying. Someone earning $35,000 contributing 8% total from age 25 might build a pension pot of $400,000. Sounds good until you realize that buys an annuity of maybe $20,000 yearly. After 40 years of contributions, you'll have less than today's state pension provides. And that assumes no breaks for childcare, no periods of unemployment, no early retirement due to ill health. Meanwhile, current pensioners aren't escaping either. The triple lock sounds generous until you realize it's protecting an amount that already doesn't cover basic living costs. Energy bills hit pensioners hardest. They're home all day, often in poorly insulated older properties. That generation that was meant to enjoy comfortable retirement, they're choosing between heating and eating, just like their grandchildren. Financial stress creates mental health disasters. The constant anxiety of never having enough, the shame of needing food banks despite working, the despair of seeing no way out. HSE statistics reveal 776,000 cases of work-related stress, depression, or anxiety. By the time people get help, they've lost jobs, relationships, sometimes their lives.